because if Heather doesn't show up, and I did this because she told me that she wanted me to go over Act 2, I'm just going to point and laugh. So, yes, those of you who don't know tonight, that is the plot twist of Act 2, yeah. Those of you who don't know, tonight we're talking about Act 2 and all the associated joys and pains thereof, mostly pains because nobody likes Act 2, which is kind of a tragedy, honestly. Like, I say that as somebody who's been complaining about my Act 2 for a week now, but Act 2 is actually it's a huge part of the book, and it's bigger than we usually give it credit for. So, the first thing I'm going to say, no, Act 2 is, so I'll back up for a second. The book, in general, books are stories. I'm not even going to just say books. Stories are broken into 3 acts overall, most of the time. Ellie on cue with the beat sheet. So, we've got the 3-act structure. Think of it like a play. Plays are usually done in 3-ish acts. I think, if I'm wrong, correct me on it. I'm sure Tavi will yell at me, because she is a playwright. So, Act 1 is the setup. It's where we see the world is being opened up to everybody. It's how we're being introduced to the setting and to the characters and to the basic idea of what's happening. Act 2 is where a lot of the conflicts take place. It's where we reach the penultimate moment of conflict at the midpoint, which we're going to be talking a lot about pretty soon. And then there is Act 3, which is where the big climactic battle happens and everything is rounded up. So, okay, well, 5-act is definitely definitely a structure that is one, I think Socrates suggested the 5-act structure. Don't quote me on that, or if you do, caveat it by I may be wrong. I'll have to look that up. But it was one of the Greeks who suggested the 5-act structure. So, now, Act 2 is the point of the book where most writers end up going, I can't do this anymore, I hate everything, I quit, I want to just throw it all away and go drink. Because that's how I feel about 90% of the time. So, Act 2 is where things start getting difficult. Now, the 5-act structure, I believe, splits at a point that it splits at the midpoint. So we have Act 1, then there's Act 2, which is pre-midpoint, Act 3, which is post-midpoint. Wait, Act 3 is the midpoint, Act 4 is the post-midpoint, and then Act 5 is Act 3. It's a denouement. Alright, so now that I've confused everybody thoroughly and completely, we are going to be focusing on the 3-act structure because it is what I know best. So, I can research the 5-act structure, some of the other ones another time, but ultimately they all hit about the same points at about the same times. It's just how you break them up. So, looking at the 3-act structure, Act 2 is where writers usually just start throwing things and drinking. The reason for that is because Act 1 is your love letter to the story. It is when you have just started dating. Everything is new, fresh, and exciting, and you're like, oh yes, let's have fun. I really want to get into this. It's a new relationship. You're excited about the characters. You're excited about the setting. You've got your plot all lined up, and you're like, yeah, let's do this gung-ho. And then the opening ends, and you start Act 2. Now, I'm going to take a second and blow your minds. Ready? Because it may not blow your minds, all right, but it blew mine, so make me feel good about it. All right, Act 2 is in fact usually about half the effing book. We talk about the 3-act structure, and my brain immediately tried to categorize it like Act 3 is 1/3, Act 2 is 1/3, Act 3, Act 1, 2, 3. I don't do numbers, all right. Each of the act is a third. Lies. Thank you, Mel. I appreciate the obligatory explosion. Act 2 is in fact about half the damn book. For short stories, that is also true. Act 2 of a short story is about half the damn story, more or less. Now, short stories, things are condensed a little bit more, but it's still half the story. So, the reason that we stumble is because when we hit Act 2, we're immediately looking at Act 3 like, yes, come to mama, tasty dessert. Because that's the part that we're kind of excited about writing. It's where everything gets wrapped up in a neat little bow, or doesn't if your story doesn't work out that way. But it's the big climactic ending, and we're like, yes, that is the next part. And I have no idea how to get there. So, now what? So, instead of looking at it that way, when you get to Act 2, your next goal is not, in fact, Act 3. It should be the midpoint. The midpoint is, as the name may imply, the middle part of your novel. It's the exact center point of your novel, or of your short story, as the case may be. So, with it being the center point, that is the point where the climax of the story, the conflict, should be at its peak. You should have the midpoint be the point where the antagonist and the protagonist, even if the protagonist doesn't necessarily know it, it's where their conflict is at its peak. So, I'm going to be starting to use Star Wars references because they make me happy and Harry Potter doesn't so much anymore. So, Star Wars references, the midpoint of the story in the first Star Wars movie is that moment when we have Ben Solo, not Ben Solo, my god, Ben Kenobi. He's facing off against Vader. You have you have Han and you have Luke and Leia and Chewie in the garbage compactor. And you have that fight between Kenobi and Vader. That is not the midpoint. I'm an idiot. It is when Alderaan is blown up. No, it's when Alderaan is blown up and they're all kind of in that space together. It's when all of the heroes enter the Death Star together for the first time. So Alderaan's been exploded. Leia's about to be murdered. Luke and Han and Chewie are trying to rescue Leia inexpertly. And you've got Kenobi and Vader getting ready to murder each other. Nope, that is not the darkest hour. The darkest hour comes later. This is the point at which the action and the tension is currently at its peak. So you've got all of this stuff happening right there. Now, we've got this whole big explosive scene happening. So the first half of Act 2 should be getting up to that big explosive moment when you have Luke and Vader and Han and Chewie and Leia and all these people in the same spot. It doesn't need to be where everybody physically comes together. I'm just giving you that as the example of what happened in Star Wars. You might not be having an immediate confrontation with the big bad guy. You may not actually be facing off against Darth Vader, proverbially speaking, in your story at that moment. You might have, in my novel, in Fallen, spoiler alert, I'm sorry guys, this will be the moment when my main character realizes what happened to Father John and how it ties into what's going on around them, and she's going to make that connection of, oh, fuck. That's going to be the midpoint, and at that point, the antagonist is now very aware of my main character's presence, very aware that my main character's getting involved, and not happy about it. He's like, okay, things have to be done about this. I can't just sit on this anymore. I can't just watch. I have to, come down there myself and, I'm sorry, monster, and beat people up. So it doesn't have to have everybody on the stage at the same time, but it is that kind of penultimate moment of, this is the central focal point of the story. This is that moment when everything's getting ready to go to shit. Exactly. It's not the climax of the story. It's the pinnacle of the conflict. And the conflict can and will, in fact, escalate a little bit more. So that is where the second half of Act 2 comes in. Now, looking at the beat sheet at that point, we've got Bad Guys Close In is next, followed by basically Everything Falls Apart, and then Dark Night of the Soul. So the second half of Act 2 is, by nature, much darker than the first half of Act 2. The first half of Act 2 is mostly the B story and fun and games, and it's where the character starts learning their abilities, and maybe they're Maybe they're looking for all the pieces of an artifact, and they go around collecting all the pieces of the artifact, and that midpoint is when they put the artifact together, and it's that big kind of climactic moment. And then after they put that artifact together, their enemies swoop in and, I don't know, steal it from them, and they have to spend the other half of Act 2 getting it back, or trying to get it back, or processing the fact that, oh no, now my enemy has this whole world-changing thing happening. Like they have the MacGuffin. Everything is lost. The MacGuffin is lost. I'm lost. The world is done. So that's kind of where we're at. Yes, accidentally killing a political figure could definitely be the midpoint of your story. It is the point at which, after that, for the second half of Act 2, is where everything is going to go wrong. Everything is going to go wrong. So you have that when you enter Act 2, instead of trying to write toward Act 3, which is a really kind of it's a thing we want to do. We want to write for our ending. We want to be like, yeah, I'm going to get up to this big battle at the ending. It's going to be great. Shit, how do I do that? So your goal, once you hit Act 2, is actually the midpoint. Now, Act 2 gets a bum rap. Everybody says it's the boring part of the book to write. Everyone says it's the hard part of the book to write. Everyone says we hate it, precious. I'm going to go drink whiskey. So, that's actually kind of psyching yourself out of writing half your book. Instead, write for that midpoint, that point where everything, like, the tension's there, and it's really exciting because they've gotten the MacGuffin, or they've been captured by the Death Star, and everything's going sideways for them. Or in my book, that moment when the demon is like, well, now it's time to murder your face off. So it's kind of, you're writing towards that big kind of life-altering moment in your story. The moment where everything's going to change. Write for that point. And if you start writing for that, it gets really exciting. So in the second act, which is, as I remind you, about half your effing book, you're going to be writing toward all of this, and there are a number of things you can do in Act 2 that are super exciting. So, there is the option of A, you can start a B story, you can start a romance, assuming you're not writing a romance already, because if you start your romance at the B story, it's just a little weird. So romance kind of has its own separate beat sheet that is very related to this one, but isn't the same. So, you could start a romance. You could have your character fall in love. You can get a lot of mileage out of the Twitter-pated little feelings, I'm going on dates, or, if your story allows for it. Or instead of having it be falling in love, you could explore some of your secondary characters. For me, Act 2 is going to be a lot about exploring Jim and Ireless and Dust. For anybody who's reading my novel, you may recognize those names. That's what a lot of Act 2 is going to be doing, is exploring those characters and their relationship with the main character, and their relationship with what's actually going on. So you've got this possibility of exploring some of your side characters, and you can get a lot of mileage out of getting to know your side characters, because you might know your main character really well, but your side characters are also super important, and if you ditch on doing some exploration of them, it's not even worth. Why have them on the stage? Why are they there? Are they just foils? Are they just 2D cardboard cutouts? Look, I'm a supporting character. I mean, you want them to have more depth than the random barista at Starbucks that your character walks past. So, exploring your secondary characters is going to be a really emotional support human. I love that. Exploring your secondary characters can be a really valuable way of getting a lot of traction. After the midpoint, there is always, of course, the classic theme of taking your super friends and breaking them up. Han Solo's like, nope, I'm out. He bones off. You have Ben Kenobi, who's died. You've got all of this stuff happening. You can take your team and be like, well, these two characters aren't getting along right now. Thank you, but we're going to split them apart, and they can come back in a big climactic moment towards the end, or what have you. You can kind of tear your team apart a little bit, or the relationship that's going on maybe isn't working so well here. That's possible. You can have characters wrestle with that internal, like, what made them not want to go on this adventure? What is it that held them back? In Act 1, there's kind of that, there's always that debate moment where the character's like, I don't know if does it gotta be me? Do I have to be the one to do this? Do I need to keep doing this? Can't I just make somebody else handle this problem? Do I really gotta? Oh, I guess I do. Um, Luke kind of has that moment before Owen and Beru get murdered. He's talking to Ben Kenobi about everything that's going on, and he's like, no, I can't leave and go learn your crazy old religion. I have to stay home because they need me to work on the moisture evaporators or whatever they were. I can't just bone off. I've got people here. I've got things I need to do. And moisture farms. Yeah, they were moisture farmers, but I think he had some kind of evaporator he was working on and trying to fix. I don't remember. I'd have to go watch it again. Oh, tragedy. Watch Star Wars again. Whatever shall I do? So, uh, you've got this moment where before Owen and Beru die, Luke doesn't want to go anywhere. He doesn't want to leave home. He doesn't want to leave the comfort and the safety, despite the fact that he keeps talking about how he wants to go do stuff. The moment he's like, no, you have to go do stuff, Luke's like, maybe not. So what caused that kind of, I really don't want to do this thing. Does it have to be me? In Fallen, Cass is dealing with, like, do I really need to be the one to go hunt down this thing that killed my friend? I am not qualified for this. I am fallen. I don't have that much power left. I have no idea what I'm doing. And God help me, I probably can't work a toaster. So you want me to do what? I'm hunting down a who? Kill me. So in the second part of, yes, literally, God help Cassiel, yes. So in part two, she's going to be doing a lot of wrestling with the fact that she is so deeply, well, she feels deeply underqualified to deal with what's happening right now. She doesn't understand the world. She has no idea what's going on. And coming into constant, like, hammering with those realities is going to be breaking some of that down and helping shape her into the character who can do what needs to be done in Act 3. Because currently, the beginning of Act 2, she is not the character who can go smite something. She is not the individual who is capable of doing that thing. She doesn't have that capacity. So Act 2 has to turn her from this lost, confused, mostly unwilling, definitely uncertain character into a person who can stand up and say, no, this is wrong. I'm not, I have to stop this thing. I need to beat it, and I'm capable of doing it. So wrestling with those kind of internal demons is a big part of Act 2, and that happens mostly after the midpoint, because up to the midpoint, prior to that point where everything is going wrong, you have this time period where it's called a number of things. There's promise of the premise and or fun and games. It's called both of those things in the beat sheet. So you've got this kind of lead up to that where the characters are doing the adventure. You're kind of fulfilling the promise of the book. So if in the first act you set this up to be a romance, well, the promise of the premise is the characters falling in love and everything is great and everything is new and the conflict hasn't really entered into the scene yet. But they're going on dates and they're having fun and ooh, isn't this great? Promise of the premise is kind of that space. It's that in in episode 4, it's when Luke is starting to learn the Force. You've got him kind of like with the blaster helmet down, trying to train. You've got 3PO and Chewie playing chess. You've got, like, there's some fun stuff in there. It's kind of like the characters learning things and growing, and it's kind of this big explosion of, here's the rest of the world, let's explore it a little bit before everything goes to shit. So you've got that whole experience. It's got a much brighter, happier tone in the first half of Act 2, and then you have the midpoint where so in the midpoint, in addition to being and everything is going wrong, it could be a false victory. The character might think, oh, I've got all the pieces of the MacGuffin. Great, I have this thing. I'm done. My quest is, I've got the golden apple here in my hands. I put it together. Now I just have to go and throw it at the bad guy's head to take him out. That's all I gotta do. It's gonna be super easy, barely an inconvenience. So I'm gonna just, it'll be great. And then, just after that, something awful happens to take them into the second half of the midpoint. Maybe, as I said earlier, their MacGuffin gets stolen. Or maybe they learn, for the unfairest, yes, for the unfairest of all of them, yeet! So maybe, the MacGuffin gets stolen, or maybe they learn, oh crap, this isn't what I actually needed to accomplish this end. I have put all of this work, all of this time, and all of this effort into a thing that is not, in fact, going to be what I need. Why are we trebucheting? Never mind. You know what? Never mind. I'm just ignoring you guys. Trebuchets, really. That's where we're going with this, is trebuchets. So, you've got this, everything could be great at the midpoint, or it could be everything is awful, the whole thing is falling apart. Either way, that's where the conflict is still going to be at its peak. Even if the characters are super excited, super jazzed, think they've won, everything's going great, that midpoint is where the tension with the enemy is at its peak, because they've got the MacGuffin, they have the golden apple on the trebuchet. And they're preparing to take it to the bad guy, and the bad guy is at this point aware of what's going on. He's got to make his move. He's prepared to make his move, and the tension there, you can just, like, if you poke it, it'll explode. Even if the main character doesn't know that the bad guy is right there, that his best friend through this whole journey is about to take the golden apple and run off with it, it's present, even if the main characters, and by extension the reader, don't necessarily know it yet. They might learn that when it all goes to shit at the next segment after the midpoint, when you have that bad guys, the next segment is called the bad guys close in. It's when, they've got the golden apple and the enemy is, in fact, right at the gates, closer than they expected. In fact, they're right there ready to take it from them the minute they have just accomplished this great victory of claiming this MacGuffin. Guess what? No. Thank you for playing, though. Good effort. A for effort. Gold trophy. But that's going to be mine now, thanks. So, you have the enemy just swoop in, and all their hard-earned progress feels like it's just torn out from underneath them. Writing up to that moment, writing for that moment, is kind of, that's going to be the meat and potatoes of your stories. Writing that whole, like, gathering up all of the pieces of the artifact, putting it together, and then having it, and then the moment where the artifact is suddenly taken away. It's no longer what you thought it was, or you don't have it anymore, now it's gone, and you have to come up with another way to handle this awful situation you're in. And process the fact that you had victory in your hands, right there, and now it's gone. Now, that doesn't sound like the boring part of the book to write, to be honest with you. That sounds like kind of the more exciting part of the book to write. Right, and it's gone. So, the idea that the second act is the boring part of the book, I think, is a serious misnomer. It is, in fact, the vast majority of your story. And while it's the hardest part to write, because the rosy glow of the beginning of your relationship with this book is gone, and now you're at the point where, crap, I actually need to work on this thing. And if you haven't outlined your book, or it's easier with short stories to not fall into this because they are more condensed. You haven't spent like 3 weeks writing to this point, like, yay, everything's great. Oh, fuck. Now, outlines are vastly more important for novels than they are for short stories, though they are still useful for short stories, but novels, there's so many little moving pieces, and there's so many words, and there's so many subplots, there's so many, like, there's so much in there that it can be kind of overwhelming to try and do without an outline, and anybody who's trying to write one off the seat of their pants, you're going to run into problems in Act 2, because you might have an idea of what you want to do, but you haven't really planned out any of the how to do it, which is why Act 2 typically just sort of peters out, and that's, pardon me, that moment. And it's a tough thing. It's not easy, but it is extremely rewarding. In the blog that I have coming out Monday, I used a bunch of food analogies because it turns out I'm hungry and it's dinner time. But the uh, the analogy I used is that Act 1 is your appetizer course. It is exciting. It is your first taste of dinner, and you are probably hungry as hell. And you are like, yes, lay that salad on me. Give me those breadsticks. I want them all. It's going to be delicious. And you've got that. Act 2 is your main course. That is your meat and potatoes. It is your, I don't know, chicken Alfredo. It is your, yes, it is your, Act 1 is in fact your amuse-bouche. But Act 2 is really the entree. That is the bulk of your story. That's where all of the real sustenance is going to come from. And Act 3 is dessert. Now, if you skip Act 2 and just do Act 1 and Act 3, you are going to be hungry later. You are not going to be satisfied. You are going to be left wanting. And you're going to be, you're going to be hangry later. You really are. Don't do it. I mean, if you're going to eat ice cream for dinner, eat ice cream for dinner. Just make sure you eat enough ice cream that it's dinner. That is not me encouraging that. But I will admit having done ice cream for dinner more than once in my life because I'm an adult who can make my own bad choices. Not sorry. So, but the Act 2 being that main course of your book, it needs to be well done. Like, you're taking your time and putting together a really good entree, which is what Act 2 is. Taking your time and putting together a really good entree is really important. And you can't just ignore it and hope it goes away, because if you have Act 1, might have been a great salad. I do love me some breadsticks. I'm thinking Olive Garden, guys. I'm really hungry. It might be really good breadsticks. It might be a delicious salad. But that's not going to tide me over. That's not going to give me enough for the rest of the day. Dessert, yeah, I love me some pie. Tiramisu, lay it on. But it's not gonna sustain me. What I need to sustain me is that Act 2. And like a meal, the vast majority of the work, most of the time, we're not talking like buying crazy things and doing weird stuff. Most of the time, the vast majority of your work on cooking is going to be on your entree, and that's where Act 2 is. It's going to be work. Fortunately, we have a recipe. That's what the outline is. Your outline that you create theoretically when you start writing your story is your recipe. So you know what ingredients are going into that. You just have to put them in. So it's very doable. And it is, in fact, quite exciting because you are writing up towards that midpoint, which is a really exciting part of the book. And then, if you're like me, a sadist who likes to see my characters squirm and cry and howl and scream, the second half of Act 2 is fabulous. Watching them cry and scream and kick their feet and, oh no, I hate everything. It makes me so happy. So, I know I'm horrible and I'm evil, and you should all rethink being my friend. Also, that's how I feel about my D&D campaigns. Yeah, torture the players. So that kind of that writing for all of those pieces, I think we psych ourselves out when we start looking at Act 2 because we're like, oh, this is going to be so much. And maybe I've bitten off more than I can chew. Can I really accomplish all of this? Well, you can. Dying in a desert does count as fun, I guess, if that's your thing. I mean, I'm not going to kink shame. You do you. You do you, man. Like, no judgment there. So, so you've got this kind of thing that a lot of writers just they get so worked up about Act 2, but really you can do a whole lot of neat pieces there. There's a whole lot you can work with. You can pull all the threads. You can see where they connect. You can create. You know that meme of the guy pointing at the board covered in like tacks and twine, like, yes, this is my baby. Look at this. It's fabulous. It's the crazy conspiracy theory guy. Yeah, that's what you do with Act Two. You put the tacks in and tie the twine, and it's going everywhere. And you're like, yes, all of these different pieces. And yeah, that's absolutely correct, Raichu. You definitely want to be going for more obtainable goals than trying to just jump from Act 1 right straight through to Act 3, because you're missing the midpoint, and that's why it feels so overwhelming. That's honestly why it is, because knowing that Act 2 is about half of the book, you're going to be the midpoint breaks that up a little bit. You've got that spot where you've written the opening, you may be about a quarter of the way in, you're looking at your word count. Yeah, I've got like, 20, 30,000 words here. This looks great. Then you start writing forward and you realize that Act 3 is a lot of words away. Like, using about 60,000 words on average as your example, you've written 20,000 at the beginning. That's great. Act 2 is 40,000 words away. Or Act 3, sorry, is 40,000 words away. That's a lot of words. And that is twice all of Act 1. And if you don't look in the midpoint as that spot that you're going for, it's daunting. You've got so much space. Ooh. But Act 2, the midpoint breaks that up. It's halfway through Act 2 by its nature. It has to be halfway through Act 2. It's halfway through the book. And you've got the midpoint there, and that's about the same amount of words you just wrote. You can. Thank you. That is exactly the meme I was looking for. I appreciate it. Ellie on point with the meme game. Thank you. So the midpoint is like it's about as far away as you've come. You're about halfway to the midpoint at this point, and it's fantastic because you've got all these things to play with. You've got the B story, you've got the relationships, you've got the fun and games, go find this stuff, let's do the thing, training montage time, because training montage also happens a lot in Act 2. So all of those kinds of like setups, the fun stuff, like the yes, we're going on the adventure. This is where you've got your D&D players. They've picked up their quest at the tavern, and now they're going into the dungeon and slaying all the monsters. Happy, happy, fun times. Let's go kill the goblins. And the midpoint is where they they get to the end. There's this locked door. They open it, and they realize the quest giver was not, in fact, a good guy. Oh, well, shit. Now they have to make the decision of what they're going to do with the not good guy quest giver. And they need to make the decision of how they're going to handle this situation, because that's kind of the moment when they realize everything has gone wrong and that everything they were working toward wasn't necessarily what they thought. Then they have, D&D sessions, it's less Dark Night of the Soul and more like, oh, murder hobo time, back that direction. So it's not quite as, impactful a lot of the time, but the base of it is you've got all these, the promise of the premise is kind of the fun part of the book. It's what you promise by the genre, by the back cover, by your setup in part 1. Have I done this before? Have I terrified my players and turned them on each other before and sent them on quests for people they thought were good that weren't? No, I would never. I'm hurt, Chris. I'm hurt. I can't say that with a straight face. Okay, so you've done all this setup in Act 1, and Act 2 is where you can really capitalize on that. That's the fun part. I've done this setup in. So, any of you who are reading Fallen, I've done the setup. We've got this beginning where Cass lands on Earth, like, da fuck. You have the beginning where she's kind of trying to figure things out. How do I use a bathroom? What is food? How do I talk to people? And Father John's like, honey, no, it's okay. Honey, no, come on, it's okay. And then you have the ending of Act 1, which I don't know if I'm going to try not to spoil it for everybody, but a thing happens, a big thing happens, a life-altering thing happens for Cass. And after that event, that's what takes her into Act 2, is the decision of, this thing has happened. This horrible life-altering thing has happened to me. And now she has to decide, she has to act on it. She has to act on it. If she doesn't act on it, there's no book. So, has to act on it because I said so, because otherwise, why am I doing all this work? In real life, people might just say, nah, bro, this is the thing for other people. This is a problem for bigger, more experienced people. This is a problem for everybody but me, because I'm not doing this. In the real world, that happens a lot. You have individuals who come up against a situation and just like, nope, thanks. But we can't do that in a novel so well. I mean, okay, so you can have a character say, no, I'm not having anything to do with this. I'm boning out. I quit. You actually can do that, but there has to be something that's like, no, you don't come back. Like Luke saying, I have Owen and Baru to take care of. You know, I've got this moisture farm. I've got things to do. This old religion thing. I don't need any of your old time religion, thanks. So I really appreciate it. I'll take the pamphlet, but I'm good. And then Owen and Baru are dead, and the Empire's after him, trying to murder his face. So while Luke did try and nope out of the situation, he wasn't allowed to. So if you want your character to be like, I'm just not. You can go that route, but there has to be something that's like, no, actually, there is a story, and actually, you are playing it, whether you like it or not. And that, that I'm not going to try and give you every possible way of accomplishing that, because, frankly, you guys are writers. You know how to do it. You don't need me to tell you that. And yeah, looking around for an adult to tell you what to do, and you realize you're the adult, it was a mistake to allow me to become an adult. I make a lot of bad decisions very quickly. Ice cream for dinner? Wait, instead of doing work, there's Facebook on this screen. Writing? No. Twitter. So, yeah, there's, but you can have a character who nopes out and gets drawn back into the plot, but they have to kind of choose that. They have to be dragged in kicking and screaming, or willingly, into Act 2, and then you have all of those lovely feelings to play with. Your character didn't want to go? Oh, well, now it's angst time. Delicious. Chris, I absolutely can write your book for you, but it will cost you a lot of money. I have done ghostwriting before. It is not cheap. And Midpoint is universal in storytelling. Yeah, you're correct. It absolutely, and the midpoint is definitely universal. Everybody, there's a point at which the story, there's this tipping point where you have that oh shit moment, or that moment that like just grabs the reader and is like, haha, guess what, motherfucker, this isn't what you thought it was. There's always that moment in every story, whether you're doing it by plan and have it plotted out nice and neat on a graph, or whether you're just like, and these things happen now, and maybe these things, and these things over here, and maybe that. But there's still that midpoint. It's still going to be there. And even if you don't necessarily know it when you set off, when you finish and look back over the course of the story, you'll be able to identify it. Now, you're pretty new to the group, so Carl, you don't know about the beat sheet probably. I think there's, if I don't have a video of my talk on it, I've got a blog that I will send it to you, and it is a really helpful way of looking at the structure of stories. It's one that I refer to a lot in here, and I beat everybody to death with it, so even if you don't use it, you need to understand it. Fortunately, it is not, it is, sorry, cat, it's cat butt time, I guess. Hi, baby. What are you doing? You're not helping. You're not helping. So, there we go. My cat is saying it's dinner time, Mama. Feed me or I eat you. So, there's the beat sheet is a really useful way of looking at story structure. It takes the 3-act structure and kind of breaks it down into beats or segments. It is originally designed for screenwriters, but it works for everything. I'm glad you're finding it helpful. I'm glad that I'm able to make sense. I appreciate that a lot. It, why are you laughing at me? That's not nice.
They don't know you.
Look, they don't need to, okay? My husband being a wise ass up in here. Um, so the beat sheet is useful for everybody, and I refer to it a lot. I will get you the data. It's not my blog on it is pretty short, and once you understand the overarching ideas of it, you'll find it pretty easy to put together. And honestly, I think that it's valuable for every kind of storytelling: short stories, flash fiction, novels, playwrights, screenwriting. I can't think of a single kind of storytelling where it's not valuable because it does follow the natural progression of how humans tell stories and have since the dawn of time. You can take the beat sheet and impose it over Greek plays and it works. So it's a really valuable and useful tool. So all of that said, we're coming up towards the end of our chat. Is there anything anybody wants to go over? Have you guys had any breakthroughs or anything that you're really like beating your head against since we haven't met for a while? Like, what's up with you? I've talked your ear off. What?
If you look in AIM, by the way,
yes.
I sent you because you were looking for names for
the okay.
Structure types.
All right, so the 5-act structure, I was wrong. It was Aristotle who came up with it.
That was the 1-act structure.
Oh, was that 1-act structure? My God, Aristotle is an idiot. A guy named Horace was the 5-act structure in Ars Poetica, which tells me that was probably Roman.
Yes.
Then later on, there was a grammarian who defined plays as 3-act, so 5-act is actually older than 3-act. And then you've got the German playwright and novelist Gustav Freytag, who wrote a breakdown of how the 5-act structure works. So, Ars Poetica. Oh my gosh, Chris, that's not very nice. Instead of Ars Poetica, it's Ars Poetica. That's his posterior poetry, also known as What Happens After Taco Bell.
Wow.
I'm not sorry. I refuse to apologize. We've hit the part of our time together where I get stupid. Yeah, the 3-act structure and the 5-act structure, honestly, are just different ways of breaking down the same thing. Ultimately, a beginning, end, and middle. Good Lord, who would have thought?
But not in that order.
No.
Unless you're writing momentum.
Let's not even talk about that. So yeah, the various acts, the structures, ultimately, they follow the same flow, regardless whether you're using the beat sheet, whether you're using 3-act, 5-act. There's an 8. There's an 8 thing out there that breaks. I think 8 scene, 8 section. I came across it today. There are so many ways that people like to break down the structure of a book, the structure of a story. There's so many ways. Ultimately, they're all the same damn thing. Apparently, we're going to the dark world now. But they are all the same damn thing. They really are. You can choose whichever one you like best and whichever one resonates to you, whichever one makes the most sense for you. Go ahead and use it. That's fine, because they are all more or less the same thing. They're going to have the same patterns of rising and falling action. You're going to have the same segments of the book, more or less. They're going to be in pretty much the same order. So, however you choose to categorize it, however you choose to look at it, that's more of a you thing. We can definitely look at all the various different structures. At some point, maybe I should do a comparison between 3, 5, beat sheet, 8, all the other stuff. I'll see if I can put something together. But and I'm not a literature teacher, but it's all the same, unless you really want to get nitpicky about it, and frankly, I don't. Any other questions in general? I hope everybody's writing is going well. Good. I'm glad that the scheduling conversation has worked for you. I've kind of fallen off of it the last week because life kind of exploded, but I want to get back on mine. But the scheduling thing I've found has been pivotal for me. When I was on vacation, I had a really set schedule. I'd get up, I'd do breakfast, then I'd write until I finished either a chapter or whatever it was I finished, and I was at a point where I needed to do big brain time and think, and it worked out to being 1,500-ish words a day, and it worked beautifully, and I got so much writing done. And now that I'm home, I'm like, ooh, internet, and I'm getting nothing done. So I really need to change that. Right? Yeah, life kind of exploded. It's a good memoir title. I give you my blessing. You may borrow that. Um, and yeah, anagram. That's the neat thing about structure. So that's a cool thing you pinpointed. Um, that is actually what people do. So the structure that I've been talking about, it's in everything: video games, movies, TV, uh, books, plays, epic poetry. No matter what kind of media you consume, whatever kind of storytelling you consume, it in fact is all following that structure for the most part, because that's how humans tell stories and have since we started saying, Thok went on fishing trip, Thok caught fish this big. We've been doing it since about that long. So even if you aren't doing it on purpose, it's gonna come out that way. Um, and that is that's a tough balance, Mel. That's a really tough balance. Um, I fight that myself, like the balance between work writing and personal writing. I've kind of decided that whatever happens during the week, weekends are my personal writing time. I don't care what happens during the week. If I don't do any personal writing during the week because I'm too busy editing or something, fine. But weekends, that's for me. So it's about deciding that what time you want for you and how you want to use that. So that's going to be the thing. And it works. It just takes a lot of effort and adulting to kind of figure out. And there's no time limit on it. Like, it take time, figure out what works for you, and what works for you isn't going to be what works for everybody else. So it's okay to fight with it and try and figure out, what your thing is. Jay, can you please text the 30 people who are texting me and letting me know that food is here? And okay, because they're all calling me. Hey, why haven't you come down yet? Maybe because I'm busy. Yeah, well, it's not that I'm putting off my writing to the weekend, Mel. It's that saying, even if I'm, for whatever reason, I can't write during the week, if, say, we've got a deadline and I'm really just trying to hammer away at that, the weekend is mine. Nobody else gets my weekend but me. Well, if you're writing a miserable, sad story, there's a reason you're writing it, for one. Whatever it is in you that you're trying to express, it's coming out. That's an okay thing. If it's if you're finding it exhausting and not healthy mentally to write, and it's not something that you feel you need to write, like, I've toyed with the idea of writing a an autobiography about a lot of the stuff that I've gone through, and there are parts of that that would not be easy or comfortable to write, but I would need to write them because that's kind of part of the whole story. That's kind of important. But if you're just telling a story for the sake of storytelling, it's okay to change gears and do something else for a while. But if you've got something in you that really needs to come out, really needs to be out there, it's okay to write dark, miserable fiction. A lot of people make good money doing it, and it might help you, like, the catharsis of it once you're done may be really beneficial to you, even if while you're writing it, it is not easy. Because there are points in some of my books and stuff where I've hit spots where writing about this thing that's happening is not easy, and I needed to write it, but it hurt. It sucked. But once I was done, there's this kind of buoyancy a little bit because you're kind of letting go of all of that and putting it out on the page. You're kind of just pouring what's in you out. And there's definitely a market for that. I mean, Shakespearean tragedies, people like them. We still, we still play them. Um, I'm glad that I'm glad you found that helpful. All right, so it is 5 minutes of 7. I am getting screamed at by everybody that food is here, and I am turning into a pumpkin, so I need to go eat something. It is really nice to see everybody. I put the homework in the channel, but the homework this week is I don't care what media it is. Play a video game, watch a movie, watch a TV show, analyze an entire season of a TV show if you want to, read a book, short story, but find the second act. Find exactly where the second act starts and where it ends, and really evaluate the events that happen in the second act of that story. And think about how all of them come together and create the third act. Also, find the midpoint. So that's going to be key. Find the midpoint of the story and look at what's happening on either side, that the two halves of the second act that are kind of bracketing it, and see how the beginning starts you towards the second act and the ending pulls you down from it. Yes, we have the same time next week, short of anything going crazy. Nice, Mike. So assuming nothing happens and I'm not sick or something, we will definitely be meeting same time next week. That is the usual plan. That is our typical schedule. Thank you everybody for being here. It was so nice to see all of you. I missed you while I was on my vacation. I hope that you have a great week. We are, as always, in the general chat to talk about whatever, hang out, bemoan our books not doing what we tell them to do. I'm always around if you need to ask questions or want help with something. So it is great to see everybody, and thank you so much for giving me your time. I appreciate it. Thank you. I will enjoy my dinner. We are doing Mel Should Be Afraid. I'm doing Panda Gourmet for dinner. So I mean, she should be terrified. Thank you very much. Have a great night, guys.